Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to give it a minute or two, let people sign in. People start slowly joining us. I'm sure it's just 2 o'clock now. While we're waiting for folks to sign in, would you please put in the chat where you're from, where you are physically in the world, and what your role is? That would be really helpful for us. So I am in Los Angeles, and I am the PACES Connection Education Consultant. A hard time typing and talking at the same time. All right, Michigan. Snohomish. I used to live in Olympia. I like Snohomish County. Judy's here in LA with me. All right, Moline, Illinois. Michigan. Excellent. For those of you just joining us, we're just adding in, while we wait for people to sign in, we're just adding where we're from, where we are actually in the world, and what our role is in this work. All right, San Francisco. Love it. Excellent. We'll give everyone, we'll just give like one more minute before we start our conversation. Today's really going to be a conversational day today. I have an image I want to share with you that came to mind just a minute ago. I just had to retrieve it, from my collection. Hopefully you'll find it as humorous as me. So I love this. Someone shared this with me the other day. This would be good for us to mull over while we're waiting for people to join. There's been all these takes on the different feeling wheels. I'm a huge Nicolas Cage fan. So when someone showed this to me as part of an opener, I just laughed and laughed. So if you are so inclined, you can put in, what Nicolas Cage are you today? Are we happy? Are we bees? I like that one. I think today I am definitely focused Nicolas Cage because I'm having this conversation with you. Alice, how long is this training? We have 90 minutes usually scheduled. And so sometimes we go less if people don't have anything else to say, but typically we do go right up until the 90 minutes. But we record all of these and put them on our YouTube channel. So if anyone ever has to leave early, they'll get the link to the YouTube channel. Lindsay, so I found this, I had the same reaction when someone shared it in my PD. I was like, where do I get this magic Nicolas Cage wheel? And all you do is Google in Nicolas Cage feelings chart, and there's a lot of them. You can even get a sweatshirt with one on it. So anyway, I just shared that lovely little tool with you. So, okay, so before we get started with our conversation, just for those of you that joined us and you haven't done it, please put in where you are in the world and what your role is. That would be really helpful for us. Thank you. Iowa, all right, the Iowa State Teachers Association. Excellent, thank you for joining us, Cindy. Southwest Michigan, great. Great. And Michelle, focused sun, happy moon, bees rising. I love it. Thank you. That's a whole new spin on it. And North Carolina. All right, so let's get started with no further ado. I'm really excited. This is our last conversation for the year. I'm not excited for that reason, but I'm really excited to have Michelle and Judy with me. They are not only colleagues, but good friends. And I think this is a good time of year for us to have a great conversation around collective wellness and healing-centered organizations and what that means, what that looks like, and how we might think about that for ourselves and the organizations that we are in as we move into the new year. So with no further ado, I'm going to let Judy and Michelle introduce themselves, talk a little bit about how they come to this work and where they are from and what they've done. And then we have a couple questions. And then after the three of us have kind of a conversation, I'm going to open it up to the group and we'll have a large group conversation. All right, everyone know how to use their reaction buttons. Does that sound good? You can use your thumbs up, your heart, your party emoji. All right, let's dive in. All right, go ahead, take it away, Michelle and Judy.
Thank you, Laura. Well, thanks first of all for having us here today. I'm excited to just arrive here in this space together and share our take in the world right now and in the work of collective care, healing-centered work, and hopefully be able to share some stories and really make this kind of next 90 minutes conversational and building new stories from like what we're listening from each other, what we're adding to the conversation. And so we hope we can do that. You'll see here that on the slide, this is kind of our big mission, the work that Michelle and I get to do with the Meaning Makers Collective. It's only Michelle and I, and we're both consultants and coaches and really responsive, facilitators to a whole dynamic of groups of people and individual people. And we've been working in schools for a while. And I'll share that I've worked as a teacher and as a school administrator for a very long time. And as of probably now, 5 years or so, I've retired as a school administrator because I was quite burned out and just demoralized, really. And that kind of propelled me into this work of like launching the Meaning Makers with Michelle to really provide some support for teachers and school administrators in how to like just navigate the complex life of like working and living and being part of school systems that don't always center healing and collective care. And it's been a real joy. And I'll let Michelle come in and introduce herself. I'll just say that I have a cat. I'm also Mexican. And if you are Mexican or you are aware of the news, yesterday we had the passing of one of our biggest ranchero music performers. And also it was Dia de la Virgen, which is a complex spiritual big day for Mexican culture. So I welcome all of that I am today. And also invite Michelle to say what's up.
Thank you, Judy.
Mm-hmm. Judy. Hi, I'm Michelle. Also background as a teacher, never an administrator, but a teacher, a coach of teachers, and many other things just related to how people relate to each other and, come together and make meaning of life, which is why Meaning Makers felt like such a natural move for me and for Judy and I. And just to say that Judy and I met because of Laura. So Laura brought us on to a project that was really a national project that was focused on educator well-being and trauma-informed practices in schools. And that's how we got to know each other, all of us. So I have a dog. I'm happily in a relatively new partnership in the personal sphere, life is really beautiful, and also interfacing with all that's going on in the world. And I'll just say in general, I think as we get into it, I think this moment of like holding the complexity of all of those things is the big practice for me, and maybe for some of you too, that things can be many things at once. So with that, I think, Lara, before we jump into the questions, Judy and I just wanted to share this practice that we do at the beginning of every time we gather with any group of people, that we try to, not focus so much. Usually we're with people that might work together, but we don't work with them every day. Maybe they have norms. Maybe you have like agreements or norms for how you come together. For Judy and I, we really recognize the importance of those things with people that really know each other well and have built those relationships. But in terms of setting a tone for a time that we're going to share together, we really like to share this intention. And we always say, if you get nothing else from this time, hopefully you can feel this, in yourself and in your body. So our intention for this time is that we may slow down. We'll definitely kind of talk more about that, and curious to hear more about that from you all, that we can slow down, that we can listen to our bodies and relate to each other in mindful ways. And so even in this moment, if it feels good to just notice your feet on the ground, maybe even lean back, notice that you're already breathing without even trying. It's happening. Maybe there's a movement you want to do just to get settled. Maybe it helps to kind of put a hand on your chest, feel your heartbeat. And just settle into however this intention means for you today, whatever this feels like for you today. May you slow down, listen to your body, and we can relate in mindful ways.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
So, do you guys want to share anything before we dive in? Anything else?
Yeah, I don't know, Judy, did you want to share on the paradigm now to kind of start speaking about how we think of collective care in our work?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we were really trying to, have a conversation. Well, we had a conversation with Lara and then with ourselves about like, where do we come to this term of collective care? Like, where was like the first time maybe that we could remember, and not like the exact moment, but like, how have we been playing with and pulled into what collective care really means? And how have we discerned throughout our work, our lives, maybe a difference between self-care and collective care, and what is needed there and why that's important, and kind of where we've landed across like doing the work in schools, also doing a lot of organizing work. I've done a lot of transnational human rights work, a lot of just different types of work that have led us to this creation or understanding of the way we see the world, and the need really today, kind of where collective care has brought us today, the need to really center this healing, like the focus on this awareness that healing centered work has been happening for quite a long time, in the human experience, and that there's often been many ways, rituals, practices, and systems that human beings have gathered to make meaning of their life and to really center things, experiences that would allow folks to thrive, not just to survive. And we also don't want to negate that in that human experience, that there hasn't been hard and deep layers of trauma and pain. And that because of that, we need to also name that and hold that in this awareness, and also ensure that we're constantly remembering that healing-centered work and history that we have, that happens in our individual embodiment of life, the way we express who we are every day, that it's happening in relationship to how we understand family, how we create family and community, and our relationship to this land, to earth, the fact that we are only alive because it is alive, because it gives us life. That also that we understand systems and institutions that's always happening around this experience of ours. now in really big systems and institutions in modern day time. And that also that history and legacies have always been here and present, and that informs really like our hope and aspirations for what is possible. And that it always has been true, at least for my experience in my ancestral teaching, that there's always been this sense of like, things are quite tough, and here's the hope for whatever generations ahead, that it can be better, and that we can really focus much more time in this thriving area. And so we really felt important to just arrive here as a way to begin this conversation of how we're understanding collective care.
And I think it also really speaks to why the term collective care, at least in my history with it, came from making a really important like discernment between wellness and well-being for educators and anyone really, being about self-care, to really taking this kind of ecosystemic perspective that we're looking at here, and recognizing that there's no harm that happens in isolation to an individual by an individual, that everything is connected to relationships, to history, to systems, and therefore there's no healing that happens in isolation. And so self-care is, in a sense, always collective. So that's, in my understanding, why we kind of came to this term of talking about kind of maybe naming something more accurately, that what we're actually in need of is our ways of relating to ourselves and each other that center care, that center healing, and that center well-being.
Yeah, I love this. And I'm really glad that you brought up kind of that distinction, because I know I had expressed this to the two of you. What I really wanted to have this conversation at this time of year as people reflect and go into the new year and have a break, but I absolutely didn't want to have a conversation about self-care, because I think that that's not it. Focusing on the burden of the self to take care of the self within a system isn't an accurate, ask of people, and is not helpful in any way. And I really love this reframing of the collective, in both, the healing in a collective, the care in a collective, the systems, ecosystems view of how we care for each other. So I really appreciate this. And I'm a visual person, so I'm like, yay, it's a picture. So great. I love it. This is just excellent.
Yeah. And it for us, I mean, we really centered it on like actual lived experience. I know I can remember many of times in being taught, from my credentialing teaching moments to like being in the classroom and being in schools, that this concept of collective care was really something really just isolated to the self. And it's like, wait for the weekend, or check it out, in the morning when you arrive, as long as you have your coffee. I often think of the fact of the one thing that was always offered in schools was coffee, like free coffee for everyone, but like sometimes not even water, right? Or it was hard to get to the restrooms. Or like there was always kind of this time like, well, vacation's coming up or spring break. And it was like, that's when we do this kind of work. And that to ask for like, what else might we do throughout the day that is not this, self-deprecating, but also like isolating way of caring for myself, and then returning to a system that's not functioning, was just not right, except that you don't know it because you get caught in the grind of it. You know what I mean? You'll get caught in the grind. And so for me, pulling back and remembering kind of like the whole of how we're here gives me more of a, como se dice, just like the strength or clarity to be able to speak to it a lot more directly. And we definitely wanted to do that today, because we know is at the end of this year, you're probably super exhausted and tired. And I'm sure you're hearing like, just make sure you rest, and just make sure you rest. And that's it, whatever you're going to do for yourself. And of course that's important, but it's like, what are we going to do collectively so that these patterns or ways of being of this isolation changes? And so we really wanted to just highlight that as well, because it's too much to carry alone. And we want to offer that maybe, and often it's doing less that we're going to get to do more, right? Doing less and being more is really the way, instead of trying to do something else. So we'll get to explore that some more.
And I think that's a perfect segue into one of the first questions that we had thought about was, over the last couple of years, how have you experienced and witnessed, this kind of vision of collective care in school systems or organizations? How have you seen this manifest itself?
Yeah, long pause. I think one of the things, and this is not a specific instance, but more of a theme that has come to mind, is I've noticed, and it maybe seems like a small thing, but I think it's a shift in consciousness a little bit. I've noticed there are more times where people have felt empowered, I'll say, to say like, no more. I think the setting of like boundaries around what we are and are not going to try to do during this time, I think has been something I've seen that's been pointing towards collective care, like recognizing that there are things that we need to take off people's plates, or to do less, or to expect, not expect less around our values, like our core values, but in terms of the literal amount of stuff, of productivity that maybe we were accustomed to, that maybe was or wasn't serving us. But I think any time where I've seen people leaning in towards like, what if we just didn't do that? What if we just let people leave? What if we just let teachers go home an hour early? Or what if we just, saw what it was like to do less and actually create space for rest? I think that's been one theme, kind of one pattern that I can think of. Yeah.
And I'll also add that I think, like many of us have been saying, probably this pandemic really helped in forcing folks to really see the speed at which we were going, right? It really allowed for people outside of our profession to like try to understand our everyday life experience as teachers and as school leaders. And everyone was like, oh my goodness, right? They do a lot and we need them. And how do we make this all work and get back where my children can be there at school and I get support at home so that we can do this together? And it also just, I think, within our colleagues and within, school cultures, really realizing the appreciation that's needed daily of our colleagues, like stopping to check in with each other and figure out how we're doing, or really figuring out what needs might we have in that given moment. And how can we actually support them right then and there? I often remember like how common it is that the teacher appreciation week happens in that 1 week in May. I think maybe some districts or other folks have it different weeks of the year, but how we had isolated even appreciation to a week where like this week we are getting the little gifts and the little things and maybe a potluck or whatever we can do with the budget. But now I feel like it's been a lot more about pausing and noticing this is something that needs to happen more repeatedly than just like a one time a year thing where people are feeling appreciated and seen for how exhausting the work is and how things needed to shift immediately. Even like the fact that we went from like, yeah, okay, let's explore this online learning and what does that mean? And can we have a balance of X, Y, and Z? Can we shift around how we're doing PD and what block schedules we have? Like it just allowed for an opportunity to think bigger, and that it actually included the adults that work in school, where I feel for a long time that was something that was not the focus. It was more, we're out here for the students, and our primary goal usually is like, we got to get them to college, right? That tends to be a big mission in a lot of schools. Like, how can we ensure kids get to college? And not like, let's pause and check in on the actual social, emotional, like personal, like way of being that we are carrying and nurturing relationships with students and with each other. And I think that's been a shift. And I'll say it's thanks to the pandemic in this weird, harmful way, but also like healthy way.
Yeah. I think, and Laura, I'm sure, I feel like you can certainly relate to this. Some of the things that we were doing together just before the pandemic around really trying to shift towards a focus on trauma as an embodied experience and stress as an embodied experience. And having a more shared, like some shared language, some shared understanding about how these things show up in our bodies and our behaviors and our ability to, you know, be in a learning mind at any given moment, or a available relational mind or space. Just that embodied trauma-informed perspective. It's hopeful to hear more people speaking that language. And I think that it's felt like the pandemic it began before, but there's been this little accelerator to where people are speaking that language relationally to each other, where it's something that's being spoken about. You know, people are tracking their nervous systems as part of like an understanding of what is going on day to day. That language is kind of more in use now. And I think that is a sign to me of collective care. It's, you know, it's understanding that we are, you know, these things that we all share in common, like having a nervous system, is a way that we can actually like come to better understand how to relate to each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I concur completely. That has been my experience as well. I've been calling it my empathy window. Like there's something about this experience that has opened up an empathy window where the conversation is more frequently had and more willing to be heard on both.
Yeah.
You know, people are talking about it more, and those that maybe not, that weren't able to hear it before are now like, oh, right, okay. You know, there's just this opening, and I'm hopefully we can kind of seize on this, as you said, the acceleration of this conversation and continue the momentum as we go forward, because I think it's really important for our organizations to change in this way. Mm-hmm. For sustainability for everybody. Like you said, this shift from like, you know, just the focus on the students to the focus on the adults in the building is really, really important. Are there other slides that you want to share with us before we open it up as a conversation and more questions?
Sure. Yeah, I think we have a couple more things. Judy, excellent. Do you have a space you want to go?
I think what Laura was saying about like the boundaries and love and empathy is good for the next slide. That it was literally here, and the work of Prentice Hemphill and the inspiration that they've brought to our lives.
Yeah. This quote, which maybe folks have seen, which it's good. Sometimes things go viral for good, and this one did. So this quote about boundaries means a lot to us in our work. A lot of times we're working, you know, in large groups, but also a lot of times we're working in small groups and with individuals. And this comes up a lot. This need to, you know, this moment has given us an opportunity and kind of forced us to reshape our relationships, and maybe even recognize literally how much space we need from each other to be well. And then also kind of carrying that into a larger conversation about boundaries. So this quote that Prentice Hemphill shared about boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. We feel like, even though this sounds like maybe something quite personal, one of the things that we're finding helps us understand collective care is that recognizing just the way that our personal practice of well-being is connected to others, right? And this concept of boundaries helps us understand that. And so these questions, if folks want to answer them in the chat, that's great. If if we want to speak to them, that's great. But also just to think about like how much of what kind of space do you need in order to love yourself well? And how much and what kind of space do you need in order to love others well? And recognizing that, you know, really at the core of a lot of what we do as educators is love, whether it's really like specific love for students, individual students collectively, the world, the work.
Yeah, this really resonates for me. I know we've talked about this before. Someone asked me recently, like, what are the essential things I would include in training for new teachers in pre-service. And this conversation is one that I wish someone would have had with me.
Yes.
I think as a young teacher, like you said, just like super idealistic, full of love and passion for my job and love for my students, I did not have any boundaries, and I had no idea about any kind of self-care. So I wasn't doing either. Like I wasn't attending to myself, and I had no boundaries in terms of what I would do for them.
Yeah.
And I ended up burning out after 10 years. I had nothing left, and I just didn't know. It doesn't mean I would have done everything differently, but I just think this idea of boundaries in terms of would have been really healthy for me to at least have a concept of when I was teaching, because it's so easy, when you really love what you do and you love your students, and to just forget about that kind of protection for yourself in that way. And I always thought boundaries were, there are no boundaries to helping my students, right? That kind of mindset of saving everybody and, can be dangerous in some way. So anyway, I just really, this idea really resonates for me.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think, not to get too heady, but I think that one of the things that feels like it's happened in the last couple of years is that idea of no boundaries in general has been kind of like that bubble has been popped. And I think we've had to face, or I'll speak for myself, really had to face like, there really are, it's not possible to keep going, keep growing, that we're learning about some kind of like limits, some natural limits or some needs to balance. And so I think, building that into how we understand what it is to be an educator, to be able to give in that way, that it is truly about balance, that it's not just about passion or desire, that there really is a kind of a natural, almost, physiological need for balance.
Yeah. And there's Cindy and Lindsay had some great thoughts in the chat. Cindy, I really like what you said about being able to advocate for, this is why we want to keep having these conversations, and in as many ways as we can, right? How do we advocate for the system in order to be able to practice the boundaries? If we know how to create them now what's the next kind of step in that process? Absolutely. And Lindsay, yes, like this is exactly what I think, we've been fortunately hearing the narrative shift a little bit from sacrificing everything for ourselves to, making sure that we are well so that we can then do, just a big paradigm shift in the way we see the necessity for taking care of ourselves. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also just seeing Lindsay sharing too. Yeah.
Right. I think this is something, again, the pandemic has helped with in some strange way, right? Like the systems won't change without consequences. What a great way to put that, right? If we keep stepping in and playing whack-a-mole and solving every problem, then people don't see that. Lindsay, do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, it just makes me think about when we teach students, right? We want them to, it's okay if they fail and it's okay if they make mistakes, because then they learn how to fix it. But same thing, if we're playing whack-a-mole and we fix it for them. Same with employers. Like and as an employee, if we don't let them, fail and learn and walk them through it, and we continually pick it up for them and fix it for them, then they're not going to change. Well, same thing. We can scream from our rooftops, like something needs to change in the system because the system is dysfunctional. But if we keep coming to the rescue, there's no way for them to fix it. And unfortunately, it does feel like it's to the detriment of the kids, but nothing's systematically going to change without feeling that pain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Cindy, you're bringing up exactly what's been on my mind, right? What we are seeing right now is we have come close to this end point where there is no way to cover that triage, sustain, we have come to this point where people are just like, I'm done.
Like the ultimate boundary.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing. You have to fall before it can get better, right?
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about this lately. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's a theme that Judy and I were talking about right before this. And I at least was feeling like, can I really come to this conversation and just say like, all right, it's going to fall apart. How do we keep centering love as it's falling apart? Like, how do we not, like you're saying, Lindsay, like jump in and try to save something that actually does need to come apart? And at the same time, hold people close and be tender with each other, and be, that it seems like a contradiction, but that is kind of what we're faced with. Yeah.
And advocating for, I'll just add advocating. I think that if you can carve out some time, when you will have this break, over the next couple of weeks, to really jot down for yourself what, an answer to maybe one of these questions about what do you need for that to be well? What would be some boundaries that would be really beneficial to you? I think what Michelle and I really advocating for is that slowing down so that we can make meaning of this, so that we can try to figure out how we need to integrate our full body embodied experience into being prepared to have these conversations and bringing this back to the table when you come back to school. And should people want to engage you in a conversation of that, within that hierarchy of work and having to do things, then at the very least, it's planting the seeds and conversations with your other colleagues about how do we support this so that we start, doing less, so that this system unravels and we can make room for newness, for that thriving. So that, just an invitation to do a little bit more time spent on this. And we also maybe wanted to go to the next slide, Michelle, because
Sure.
I think we wanted to talk about what gives us hope, and
I love
also
this question.
what's making you mope, because I don't know, I wanted to make sure, as always, like it's both, and we want to make sure that this conversation feels generative to all of us, and so we wanted to offer a little bit of what's giving us hope, and yet what's icky and weird, and we're trying to work through. Maybe Michelle, you want to start with that first one?
Yeah, well, just sharing and also inviting folks, if you want to answer this question, because I think you're welcome to answer in the chat or answer out loud. And this is part of holding the complexity of it and trying to create more spaces where we can be with the complexity of the moment. And so that unraveling that we were just talking about, Judy and I, as we discussed it, realized it's both for us. It both gives us hope for all the reasons that we all just said. And it's stressful. It's stressful to kind of be with something that's coming apart, and hold some distance from that too. I think there's also this centering, like we talked about, this new collective recognition of the importance of rest. This is out there. This language is becoming more kind of shared around the need for rest, and what rest actually is from the perspective of our bodies and our nervous systems, that there's a level of rest that might actually be something that doesn't feel comfortable or easy at first, and that little by little, learning how to actually rest. When I hear this talked about, it gives me a lot of hope. We've talked about several of these things already, this kind of great resignation moment where people are setting that kind of boundary, that limit. And I'll just say for myself, and then let Judy share, that for me, anything involving play and playfulness, and again, that really does come from what we're all learning together about our bodies and our body's ability to be in a place of a felt sense of safety, and like Lara said, her kind of empathy window, or our resilience zone, or our capacity for resilience to continue expanding. Play and playfulness, things that are low stakes but high on relationality, where mistakes, like Lindsay was saying, like mistakes are encouraged, that learning, it's all about like learning and adapting, and that the stakes for being excluded, left out, left without resources are low. those where we can like put our energy towards guaranteeing that there's that people are held. And then what we do together is more like play. So those are things that are giving me some hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, please feel free to join us in the chat, or if you want to speak. I can't really see if you have your hand up, but I know Porter will let us know. The last one there has really been a big one for me this whole year. It's really trying to explore for myself the answer, who are you when you have no problem to solve? I think that I thought, and I've been trained and to think also that I'm here to fix problems, that I'm a really good problem solver. And especially as I went in to get these leadership positions within schools, it was almost like the more problems you can fix and fast, the more fires you could put out really quickly, the better you would get recognized, the more you would get paid, the more you might advance to another position, the more certificates you receive at the annual X, Y, and Z, and it was like, I did not know, I don't know sometimes who I am when there is no problem. And like what Lara was saying, the amount of burnout when I was like just constantly trying to solve everything and not having the boundaries to like, wait, really, who am I underneath all that? What else am I? And what can I do with that? How can I spend some more time there instead of, again, trying to solve problems constantly? It goes back to what Cindy was saying about filling in gaps and doing the most, it's like back to doing less. Yeah, definitely. And then there's things that, go ahead.
Oh, no, this all relates so much. I mean, I think what you just said, like, I think, gosh, as a teacher, that helps feed, for me personally, helped feed that sense of urgency. I became a doula to help my students who didn't have advocates. I worked with teen parents. And people are like, oh my God, that's so amazing. You became a doula to help your students. And yes, I mean, it was amazing. But then like reflecting backwards on it, I'm like, that's actually not super healthy, that I felt that I needed to do that to solve their problem of not having an advocate in the delivery room. That for me to take that role, to become that person, there's no system to support us, that I'm, again, like that was one of the whack-a-moles, like, okay, I'll solve that problem myself by becoming the solver. That's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to put myself in that role to solve that problem. And that, just kind of what you were saying, made me reflect on that experience for myself. But yet it was met with a lot of accolades and like appreciation and attention for like going the extra mile or taking that extra step. And when anyway, there's lots to think about. Thanks.
And a deep breath for it, right? Because it's been living in our bodies too, right? The body keeps a score. Great title for that book, but like great title for our body experience, really, that like we didn't even know all of that was happening to our bodies while we were doing all that, and here we are when you finally are able to pull away for just a sec, whenever it is, to make deeper meaning than maybe like, quick breaks, but like actually figure out these answers and being, I would say having the grace to know that like, I also don't need to come up with the answer like right now. And I'm not going to become the expert in that answer, right? Letting go of that perfection and expertise that also gets trained in all of us to figure out like, okay, this unraveling that Michelle was speaking about, we were all speaking about here, is like, let that be how you start answering these questions for yourself that might bring you some more of this hope and maybe open up direction, roads, opportunities of a different way of being that really truly includes your whole self. And just really wanted to say that too.
I think the last thing we'll share and then open it up is Judy's handwritten note on this slide. It had to go there, I guess. All of this has kind of culminated in an approach that we're trying to use as kind of an anchor for ourselves, and we offer it to you if it's useful, is an approach to leadership, recognizing that we all, whether we're in a structural position of leadership or not, that impulse to fix, that impulse to change, that impulse to want things to be different, there is an innate sense of agency, I'll say, that we all have, that we want to work with, right? For the sake of balance, for the sake of well-being, and for the sake of not having systems that are dependent on people being extracted from in order to maintain the system. And so for all of that, we try to cultivate a type of leadership that reduces harm and does that by seeking opportunities for power with relationships and ways of being. And so power with is almost another way, I'll say, of like thinking about that boundaries quote. That is a power with relationship on a person-to-person level. And that's what we're looking for systemically. And so these are practices that Judy and I have kind of oriented ourselves around. And without going into like, we could do conversations on each one, but just really letting these words maybe land with you and see what makes sense. That slowing down, just a practice of slowing down, we found to be useful in so many ways. That, you know, only it's kind of if that image of like a ship moving, in order to turn and change direction, we have to slow down before we can do that. And we're recognizing these needs for change. And then there's also just that without slowing down, we may not be able to tell what we need in any given moment, individually or collectively. So just that practice of slowing down, because it's hard, because we might be in a kind of momentum that is hard to shift. And attunement and co-regulation, you know, what Lara was speaking to about, actually, I think this might've been before the conversation, but just the state of our collective nervous system being so highly activated, given everything that's happened, that an attention to being able to recognize when we're in states that are not conducive to relationship and to learning, and be able to shift that individually and collectively. This orienting around a felt sense of safety, giving ourselves time to even understand or feel into what does it feel like to feel safe again now in this world as it is right now. What does that feel like in my body, in our emotions, and all of it? This focus on accountability and not shame. This is super important for anybody, and also for those of us that do hold some kind of structural power, and those educators do hold some kind of structural power, that we have to recognize the ways that power is, that just the structure of it might be causing harm, and that we're part of that, and that we are part of that much larger system. And that what does it look like to kind of own our piece without taking on the weight of, and the guilt and the shame of having to fix something that's so much larger than us. And then this reflection and meaning making, kind of everything we've been hoping to do so far and would like to do now with you all. So that seems like a good moment to kind of open it up.
Yeah, absolutely. We can stop screen sharing and see everybody's faces if you're able to join us. I put that, so what Michelle just referenced, we were talking about this article that came out in Edutopia this week by Laura Thomas, which I think she did a really excellent job of highlighting, because, you know, I said, whether you're a teacher or in a school, if you're a parent of a kid in a school, I've just been hearing especially over the last month, you know, everyone is leaving, or what's the people that are there are just in total nervous system chaos. You know, kids are experiencing it, teachers are experiencing it, everyone's having fights, and there's not enough supervision, and just kind of this feeling of overwhelm. And, you know, really related to what Michelle was just saying of the 5 bubbles, where, you know, we aren't slowing down, we aren't doing any of those things in the reality that we're in. And so everyone's nervous systems are just off the charts, and we're still going full steam ahead with the expectation that things are like they were before, which still wasn't functional, but not slowing down, not co-regulating, not taking a step back, not, you know, we're just like, okay, here's another initiative, here's another thing that we're going to do, take care of yourself, that's your job, you know, this kind of narrative. Yeah, thank you for putting those in the chat, Michelle. I really appreciate that. And this was one of the first articles I've read in a while where I think she did a great job of putting it in that kind of like nervous system regulation language, and just saying enough, like we're enough. Teachers can't take anymore, students can't take anymore, and we can't keep going the way we're going to go, that things are right now. We have to stop and slow down. And that was really that slowing down. And that's so hard to do. So that was kind of what I was, one of the things I was thinking we could think about is, what does that, how do we in our own roles encourage that? If we know, we feel it, we know it, that's what we need to do. How do we go about helping that to actualize, I guess, is one thought I had. Because like you said in before, just having a PD on this isn't a healing exercise, right, especially right now, right? Here's another 2-hour, session to sit through and listen. How do we encourage this shift to happen? And I'd love to hear from everybody on this question, kind of what might a humanizing system look like? What does that look like? What does that mean for us? Whether you're in a school or another organization, like what does a humanizing system look like and feel like for us? I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you, Judy. That was a great capture of my rambling questions.
I was thinking something, Judy was talking earlier about kind of some silver linings of this pandemic. And I think that one of the silver linings of this has been like an awareness and acknowledgement that humans are working teachers, and because we've been invited into their homes via Zoom and seeing their children and seeing their dogs and trying to make things work and balancing it all. And I think that this has brought an awareness to the fact that, there are humans working in these positions. And I think that there's a desire to want to shift, but there's this kind of underlying, that's what we did before. We need to get back to what we did before. And so there's like this pressure, I think. So I think continuing to have this conversation about it and bring awareness to those silver linings of what we saw during the pandemic, being invited into people's homes and asking these questions, I think are going to be really pivotal in making those systemic school-wide changes. I mean, not just school-wide, just like community-wide. And as other employers are looking and going, oh, holy smokes, we have humans that are here. And how do we humanize our policies and our practices? So not an answer, but
no, but those are great insights. I appreciate that. I was really interested too in what you shared about Washington State opening up that conversation. To me, that was a really interesting example of a systemic approach to normalizing at least the conversation around it. Like you said, not having the prescriptive answer, but just being like, hey, the state's going to have a website and we're going to have a conversation around normalizing this conversation around mental health and emotional health. So that was really fascinating to me.
We have a lot of commercials on our TV and on the radio with people sharing their stories and just talking about this collective nervous system that we have all felt this, and why aren't we talking about it? That's probably the commercial that stands out the most to me. So it's been really cool to see.
That's great. I'm gonna go look that up on YouTube.
Yeah, me too. It makes me think about some of the work that a friend of all of ours, friends of all of ours are working on around grief in schools, and how just acknowledging and accepting that there is a need to move through kind of mourning. I think it's easy for me to be like, I don't want things to go back to how they were before. That wasn't, normal isn't good, like all of these things. But I also miss in that the opportunity to recognize the need to grieve what was lost, not because it was good or ideal, just because it was familiar. So I think mourning, I don't know, how do we integrate opportunities to mourn so that there can be that natural push then into feeling the silver linings, like feeling the rebirth.
I'll go next because I have to leave here in a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to express my appreciation for this conversation and listening to you all. It was very helpful for me. And it really aligns what we're trying to do here in Iowa as a union, and our educators, our members that are out there. We're trying to put forth an organizing effort in our local associations around advocating for well-being, I guess, for lack of a better word, and doing an organizing attempt in each local around what they feel are their issues and what they want to organize around as a collective, and taking that opportunity to not only do member voice, but educator voice to the systems, and whether that's to the community, whether that's to administrators, whether that's to gather community voice from families, but to do that as a collective and pick a topic for a theory of action change, make it solution focused, and get voice to collectively move a theory of action around a problem of practice. So it really aligns with many of the things that were said today. And I really appreciate that collective healing, because I feel that's what the base of it all is. So we're just starting that kind of campaign, and we're going to take it slow. We're just taking a couple local associations and putting some funding behind it for however they want to use that funding, kind of as an experiment, but has some of the same elements of what we talked about just now. So I greatly appreciate the presentation, and I will look at this recording. I think it'll be helpful for us to look at again. So thank you.
Oh, I'm so thrilled. And I love that plan that you put out. That sounds amazing. And it like makes me hopeful and excited. And I put my email in there for you. So please don't hesitate. I'm the education consultant for Paces Connection. This is what I do. So please don't hesitate to send me an email and be like, hey, what was that thing? What was that article? What was that thing you said? Or, you know, asking me for more resources. I will connect you to all the people I know that do this work, and you know, send you things that come along. I want to help in any way that I can. This is really exciting. I'm glad to hear that this was helpful.
Yeah. And I was a school social worker by training. So this all kind of collates to everything I've done in my life. And I am so excited about bringing that mental health effort to this whole collective effort. So it's exciting.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
Anyone else want to jump in with their voice at the moment? Their thoughts on what any of those questions, or a different question that I didn't mention? How do we actualize? Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, I can just say real quick, something that resonated with me that was talked about earlier was not relying on those breaks that already exist. And using especially like the benefits and the time off that we've accrued through working. It's not, I mean, either way, the time off policies are important, but the time off, especially at my place of employment, you gain it based off of hours work. And with the holidays coming up, things are busy, and I just keep thinking, oh, I'll have a few days off. So I guilt myself out of taking that time that I could really need for a variety of reasons, even though my place of employment is pretty good at encouraging us to do so when we need it. And I think that is just, again, the societal pressure of that guilt of feeling like, oh no, like even though I have that time off that's part of my contract, that's part of what my pay is essentially, I feel that guilt of, oh, if I'm not working today, what will I miss? What should I be doing? And I think that is a conversation that I've been hearing more and more. And but I never thought about it in terms of balancing it out with those actual breaks that are scheduled out. I'm not teaching currently, but I plan on becoming a teacher. And I know that is something that it's like, okay, soon I'll have a break. And so I can just make it until I have that next break. And I think giving ourselves that grace to take that time when we need to is really important.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you joined this conversation before you became a teacher, because I sure wish I would have had this conversation before. And yeah, like you said, Lindsay, guilt, you know, that guilt over taking care of yourself or taking care of your kids, or especially, I think in my experience, I have one of my kids has some pretty intense mental health needs, and that there's a difference or a distinction. Like if he would have broke his arm, it's like, oh, I can take off time to take care of him. But if he's having mental health needs and I can't really leave him alone and I need to take off time to take care of him, it's a different, in my own feeling, you know, certainly not the organization I work for, but there's this kind of I separate that somehow. There's a guilt around one versus the other, or, you know, and I was actually just having this conversation with another mom that, you know, where she works, it is separate, you know, like she, you know, she doesn't have the space to go for mental health needs, you know, but then if it was a physical illness, then it would be, acceptable, culturally acceptable in the workplace to be gone. And Daniel, what you just said, oh my God, so read, like as a teacher, just that narrative around like, if I can just make it to spring break, if I can just make it to spring break, like not focusing on where you're at in the moment, but always looking at like where the next off ramp is so unhealthy. But it is, and it is the narrative around you too. It's not just you doing it to yourself, but you know, everyone, like the media, the school, everyone's like, there's even like a countdown calendar sometimes, you know, like 2 more weeks to Christmas break, you know, but to me, that's just such a symptom of our need to really look at what's going on. So I'm glad that you brought that up, for sure.
Yeah, and just wanted to reiterate that too, Daniel, like especially as you're going into it, right? You know, every time that guilt moment or shame, however you want to describe it, pops in, just that slowing down practice of like, what if I just slowed that thought down a little bit longer and start discerning like what part of that is actually mine to hold and what part of that is actual by design. You know, by design, we have been taught that we should feel guilty and shame. You know, it's in those like informal conversations and everything. So just, I wanted to offer that, you know, every time that feeling comes up in you, just the pausing to slow it down, be like, oh, well, this is by design, and that's not something I'm going to hold. And I'm going to, what do I kind of walking through those questions we often ask in trauma-informed work about like moving from what's wrong with you that you want that to like, well, what's currently happening here that I'm feeling this way, to like, what might I need from this space that I need to take, or from other people that can support me. And then that being really what's going to guide your answer and your next step. So just wanted to offer that because it'll pop up. It's a little sticky sucker that'll come back all the time, that guilt and shame. I mean, so many of us have been in this work for 15, 18, 20 years, you know, and yes, a lot of people make it to retirement like at 25, 30 years, but a whole lot of us just, we couldn't anymore. It's really hard. And that's okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I just think, and the more I can do to help the system be gentler on people, I want people to feel like they can stay in the system, you know, in the practice, whether it's teaching or whatever it is that they are really passionate about, and not feel that they have to choose between their family and their work, or, you know, a lot of the things that have, that I've seen come about over time. And I think the grief, I'm going to have another session of, on just grief coming up in January, February, I think, because this has just come up because of the pandemic. Again, it was obviously there before, right? We had people grieving in schools because we're human, but there was no space for it. And now there's such a collective grief, and it's so in our face. I was working with a school, actually it was in Washington this fall, and I was meeting kind of the pre-meeting before the PD, like, how have things been? Help me understand what you've been going through. And they were like, well, we lost 3 staff members last spring. And, you know, I was like, oh, wait, stop, you know, whoa. And now you've just come back, and it's, you know, we're having this conversation in October, and where are you at? And how are your staff experiencing this grief? And, you know, they were just like, yeah, well, we don't have time. You know, it wasn't even like no one was telling them they couldn't. There was no setup practice. There wasn't a public way or a set way to acknowledge it. And they just felt it was almost like an internal urgency to keep going, you know. And so we really got deep into that conversation before we could even talk about how do they be trauma informed. Is this concept around grief, you know, is like, I feel like the big unspoken topic right now in this way. So yeah, Lindsay, go ahead.
I'm really looking forward to hearing about that, because as Michelle was talking about, like, how do we collectively grieve in the schools? It made me think about how as a society, we don't know how to talk to somebody about grief. And like what Judy was talking about, we try to jump in and fix it, or do this comparative language, well, at least, or we try to minimize something in an attempt to make somebody feel better, but then it actually makes it worse. So I think individually, we need to know how to, with somebody that's close to us, how do we help them or walk with them along in their grief and allow that space and discomfort. But then, how do we do that collectively as a school without trying to jump in and fix it, without comparing, without minimizing? And I don't know the answer to that. Like, no. I put in the chat box myself, like I just lost my grandpa just not even 2 weeks ago, and I'm grieving, and I know, grief is really important. But that guilt and that shame and trying to fix it, or trying to give to, my job, and like, oh, see, I can still do it and grieve at the same time, So I'm really interested to hear that. I think that's going to be a really great conversation and so needed.
I know this has been something that folks have been saying for quite a long time. Like, I think those of us that are like on the path of trying to humanize schools, the bigger picture, will try to ride any horse that's like going in that direction. And for a while it was social emotional learning, right? And so I think it's like, okay, that's how we're gonna do social emotional learning. That's what we're gonna call it. Let's do it like that. But I think that really centering these collective experiences that we're going through as worthy of learning, like worthy of learning about, like it's worthy content, for lack of a better word, of what is going on in schools. It's worthy to center grief. It's worthy to center, what we've all been through these last couple of years, not as services to support academics, but as maybe seeing the purpose of these multi-generational gathering spaces that we are calling schools, where people have all this experience to share, and how can that be centered rather than seen as like, we need to do that in addition to teaching, academics.
Yeah. I love that. Intergenerational spaces at our schools. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think, we have students walking into our buildings with all of this held grief, and they may not know how to deal with it. Their families may not know how to process it. They're still coming to the building with it. Teachers are walking around with all this held grief. They don't know how to process, that's what I mean. I feel like this is the river, the current under the river that is true, that we don't know how to talk about. And so this, Michelle referenced, we have a good friend and colleague that is working on this, and that has been on my mind. Like, I need to tap into her wisdom around this, because I think this is such the next step in creating a humanized healing space. What is more human than to love and to grieve and to feel all the feels, and how do we do that in a system?
In the system. Yeah, that's always the tricky and difficult part. And I know when we again slow down and create some space to even make meaning of that, I'm sure collectively we could come up with some ways to begin and to have and hold these conversations. In the moping, a little box we had in there, like the grief, or like dealing with everything we see in media and the news and everything that's happening like every day. And we're walking into schools, like the level of violence in our schools is extreme, and every single person that works in a school or comes to school, students really feel it and talk about it. And there's really actually no even time to even process that. It's more like, yep, that happened again. Oh, that shooting. Yep, that, there's just not even that, which is like an extreme example of violence and harm. And so I'm just trying to highlight that as like, well, it gives me mope. I'm wondering, where might we just start creating rituals and routines where we just almost like force it, like, we're going to have this conversation. I'm going to open up the space for questions with my students and processing it here. And maybe someone will come to me and tell me about my minutes of teaching and that I'm not X, Y, and Z, but like waiting for that, like not trying to even solve that problem, but just one step at a time, figuring out where that conversation can lead and how much more room is possible to continue to have it. And that the more one teacher does it, another, I would say also like having the one person on your team or whoever to start that conversation with is helpful, because often, and even in this work that Michelle and I do, there's a lot of moments that I want to be like, I give up. This is too much. I don't know. Why did the principal yet again put us in a PD block that's 1 hour when the teachers haven't eaten? Like, no, right? And so it requires Michelle as my buddy, as the other person, to make meaning with me. Like, how do we grieve that? How do we make meaning of that? What else might we do? And so I want to advocate for, we're definitely not doing this alone. And we have to start figuring out the where and the who's of how we're going to continue this conversation, because I mean, I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I just wanted to elevate that yet again. We must.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point too, because I think for my own self, like I don't feel equipped to necessarily have that conversation or lead that conversation with a group. That kind of, for me personally, that's not my skill set. It paralyzes me to think about, am I going to open up a conversation around grief with my colleagues or with my students? I don't know how to do that. So I'm just not going to do that. So I'm just going to skip over that part because I don't know how to do that. And I might cause more harm by opening that up if I don't have the skills. And I think this is one thing I've found in working with lots of groups of teachers is I think we assume that teachers know how to be relational, that they know how to build relationships with students. We might assume that teachers or staff in a building know how to have this conversation, and they don't, and that's okay. But like you said, what I've learned is that I know my go-to people who do know how to have those conversations. So I would ask them for support to either come in with me and lead that kind of conversation, like your school counselor, whoever is like, they're, they have that skill set, because it's not just intuitive. It's not just something that you either have or you don't have. It's a skill that people have built and learned and know, and that's great. And so if it's not you that has that skill, that's also okay. But then like you said, find your partner. Okay, who do I know in my building that can help me lead that conversation with my students, with the colleagues, with, us as a staff, with myself, or give me those skills, help me learn those skills. If they don't want to do it with me, how can they help me build my skill set? So I think that vulnerability of like, it's okay if you don't know how to do that. Let's explore that. Okay, great. How do we then use the strengths around us instead of just feeling that feeling of like, I have to know how to do that. I'm really sure that wasn't covered in my pre-service, ever.
Oh, that's right. No. Yeah.
Kimberly. Oh, okay. You know what? I'm going to put the
SCCR.
Yes,
I'm
going to put
for it. Yeah.
That web page in. I can look that up really quick. And if you guys have other ideas for good resources.
Yeah, I think that link and getting on their newsletter is a good place to start.
Lindsay, were you going to add something? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking of a couple of things. I think I appreciate that Lara, sorry if am I pronouncing your name right, Lara?
Lara, it's okay. Lara,
is that sometimes we just owning that we don't know and kind of doing like an inquiry study with our teachers that teach inquiry is like, what does this mean and what does this look like? I think that they would probably come up with some really innovative, ideas. And two, I think about when I go to my spouse, and I've had a really bad day and I don't want him to fix it. I just want him to go, that sounds really hard. And just empathize. I think that's a part of grief too. And it, something that Michelle said that keeps sticking in my mind is, the fact that teachers love their students, and how do we hold this space where it's conflicting? It's like this broken system, and we also love, and I think that it made me think of divorce and how during a divorce and there's kids involved, if the parents can do it, is loving the child and walking them through it, because it's this broken family structure, a broken system, and holding them and loving them and going, this is hard, and let's talk about these feelings, and I don't have the solution. And I think that as a whole we can do that as well, is just go, yeah, this is hard, and sometimes just leaving it at that.
I think that helps too with the fear of the reality and the fear that if we go about these things without the skill set, but thinking we know what we're doing, there's the potential to cause more harm. But I also think there's a little bit of like, you know, fear, and usually by those of us who probably do have more of the skills than we think we have, there's fear that we're going to cause harm. So we don't, you know, we hold back or feel like, oh, I can't, or it's not sanctioned. We're not all doing it together, so I can't do it. But I think what you're talking about, Lindsay, that just like that stance of like humility and curiosity that I may not know, right? I may not know exactly the right way to help you through this or to be with you through this, but I do know that I'm here and I'm ready to learn. And like, I think that the skill set can develop, but I think that there's both like not wanting to fall into the urgency, but there is an urgency to the moment to show up with like humility and curiosity. And that might be what's needed. And then, you know, knowing that the person you're trying to help is going to teach you what they need. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I love that humility and curiosity, and just reminding yourself of that. Like, that's where you're coming from. I don't know. Yeah. I know that I'm here and ready to learn. I love that. That's really helpful kind of mantra, I think, too, when you get caught in that paralyzing fear a little bit. Just like, oh yeah, okay. How we come about it. I think that's a really helpful reframing. And I put the link in there for the school crisis healing. It's a SAMHSA funded project, and it's not just about schools in crisis. There's a lot within their resources and offerings, like their webinars about grief in schools, how do educators, you know, express grief, how do we help? So there's a lot of resources within there about this grief conversation. And these are the folks, they're amazing coaches and facilitators that work with this group, and they're the folks that I'm going to pull into this conversation around grief. So that's a great one to share. Thank you for asking. And yeah, thanks for asking that, Kimberly. What other thoughts have bubbled up?
I guess I was just curious, like for the folks that are still on, is there anything, you know, since we're a small group now, is there anything that people need in this moment that would be helpful for you to hear or just to say out loud, or yeah, is there anything people need right now?
Stuff we haven't covered. Kimberly was asking about skills to support relationship building. It's interesting. What comes to my mind is protocols.
Yeah.
This is where I've learned to, by using a lot of protocols, and I'll pull up a link in a second. It's just being slow. So, and this gets at kind of what Michelle was saying too about playfulness. So this is just an example, School Reform Initiative protocols. It's beyond, I mean, yes, there are some ways to use icebreakers and tools like, you know, getting to know you surveys, and there are ways to get to know each other. But having protocols and ways to have fun and play games and learn together with adults is just as important as it is for students. So when I was working with a staff who we had this realization. Someone was like asked the perfect naive question, was like, I don't know how to build relationships with my students. And someone was brave enough to say that out loud. And then everyone was like, yeah, I struggle with that too. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, stop everything we were doing, right? We've made this assumption, because teachers often are relational people, that everyone knows how to do this and feels confident. And so we just kind of like stopped everything. And for the next 3 months, all we did was talk about building relationships. But I started with them. That was another surprise. I started with the adults, and I was like, okay, guys, we're going to use these protocols as support tools, and we're going to play games, and we're going to have fun, and we're going to be silly, and we're going to do things. We're also going to learn, but we're going to focus on doing this together, and then talk about how you model that with your students. And so, but again, it was a process of slowing down, right? We had to slow way down. And it took us 6 months to get to where we thought, we were like, okay, that's okay. Because we're not going to get to where we want to go if we don't slow down and focus on this first. So yes, this is good. Yep. Fostering resilient learners. Yeah. There's a lot of great books.
That makes me think, Laura, that like a lot of the times I think the sense of like conversations that are about feeling things, touchy-feely things, we forget everything we know about structure and like the importance of structure for actually creating equity and creating, so I think that, what you said is really well taken around leaning into like process and protocols to help us so that we're not, if we happen to be the teacher, the facilitator, we're not holding the entire thing on our own, but the protocol or the process is holding some of the structure. Yep,
exactly. And within that, because I think my fear if I start to feel nervous as the teacher, whether I'm facilitating adults or teaching students, I try to hurry up and rush things and urgent, like, oh my gosh, okay, I have to fill in all the space. And learning to use protocols really helped me to, one, learn how to slow down when I didn't know how to build structures that created space for equity. And like you said, like just hold that space, just the structure to be playful, to slow down. For me, some people do that naturally. I needed that support of like, okay, here's what I do first. Okay, here's what I do next. And then in practicing those, became more fluent in being able to allow that process to happen. Yeah. And then seeing the magic that comes from that experience. And then, and again, like I used to just say to groups of teachers, just trust me, trust the process. And in 2 months, or whatever, if at the end of this 2 hours, whatever, you don't see a little bit of where this is heading, then let's talk about that. But usually they're like, oh, okay. Anyway.
Yes. I often think of that protocol that we love, Laura, dilemmas of practice, like I really hope, I don't know where the link is at for that, but it's a real good one to create actual sacred space for someone to share a dilemma that they're going through. Like, I'm really feeling grief about X, Y, and Z, and I'm not sure how to go about it. I might not have the skills. I'm not sure. And it's a way for the rest of the people in the group to like give you some feedback and really actually practice listening and support. And, there's equity in it. And really a dilemma could be anything. And I think it's a real good one because that's really how you start building some trust and respect amongst your colleagues and some commonality. And it's a real good one. You could definitely use it with students too. But it's been especially good for adults because it can create a space for vulnerability, and really accountability and not shame, and kind of all these practices we talked about of healing leadership. So it's definitely one of our favorite protocols.
Yeah, I just put the link in there. The National School Reform Initiative is another place with just like oodles of free protocols. And they break it down by like, what do you need? Do you need help with a problem of practice? Do you need help with a close reading exercise? They break it down on depending on kind of what your needs are.
That just gave me the idea of like how cool it would be to have spaces like this where people work through a dilemma through that process, but collectively. Because ultimately, like usually what ends up happening is that one person's very specific dilemma has connections to, things everybody's experiencing.
That would be really cool. We could,
I'm taking notes over here. I'm like, oh, good idea.
Like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the dilemma can be things like you said, right? I don't know how to build relationships with students, right? Like these things that feel hard to admit, but so common.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And maybe it's even, I don't know how to build relationships with students now after COVID, after, personal loss, after, right. Like being willing to revisit that we're beginners again. Yeah.
Has anybody done this on Zoom or like used, you have, and done, what is that board? I forgot, I'm having a blank, where people can collectively, it's like a Google board. Jam board. And like do something like that. That could work over Zoom too. Yeah, you've done it?
Yes, we've done it. Yeah. We've done it with groups of like 5 folks, 7 folks. Yeah.
Usually did it work out well?
It has been really, really awesome. And yeah, one thing that we've done to support the people we work with, it's kind of like we present like, this is what we're doing. And then we spend some time doing like one-on-one coaching to help that individual person really figure out their dilemma and how, preparing themselves fully, like for being in this space and what they want the space to be like for them and how can we best support them. And then like they're the presenter, right? For the following session, and everyone gets to be the listener. And so we rotate everyone going through this process. Yeah, it's really, and we've done it through Zoom. Yeah, that's how we've been doing it. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, I think there was that moment in the beginning where all of us who like to do these facilitations in person were like, how do we, okay, then we like adapted really quickly, like, okay, we can do this on Zoom, we can use Jamboard, we can get creative, and have been able to be successful with it virtually as well. All right, folks. Well, it is getting close to the end of our time. I just would like, for those that are left, if you'd like to put a word in the chat of kind of where this conversation has landed for you, a feeling that you're having at the moment, how are you now? A one word that represents kind of where you're at, and any other closing that you guys have. I know you love these.
Yeah. That's all we were going to say, Laura. We have like this emotional map that we created, and we'd like to invite folks like in the same, way that you were sharing. Is there a word here? You could definitely annotate this if you're into annotation of like documents. Going up for the drop down under view options, you could click annotate and then pick a stamp, or you could draw on there. And just wondering if you could, take a moment to take a deep breath in, moving your body in any way that feels right for you, to really tap into your body, that intention that we set at the top of that 90 minutes of like maybe noticing if something has shifted in your body or mind or spirit and where you might be. And I'm seeing folks do that already. Yeah. Or you could just drop it in the chat box, as Michelle's saying too. You don't have to annotate it. Yeah.
I love the annotate tool. When I discovered that, I was like, oh, how fun. I'm going to use the stamp instead of my poorly scribbled little heart there. What? Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad I'm glad to see all of the feels on there.
Yeah. It's always all the feels.
I think another topic, this came up earlier. I don't know if Lindsay, you were the one that brought it up, but this experience of change and letting go. I think Michelle, then you kind of piggybacked on that, like that letting go of something is grief in itself, right? That another one of my favorite books by William Bridges, but making the most out of change and thinking about the psychological process we go through, that when we ask people to start doing things a different way, or we think about change, there is a grief in that is often unacknowledged around letting go of the way we did things that made us comfortable and trying to be vulnerable and scary and try something new. There's a grief process within that. So I think that's actually another good topic.
Yeah. Yes. You've got your next 5 sessions.
I know. I'm done.
2022. You have it pre-planned.
Well, I really appreciate all of you being here with me. They say the biggest gift is your time. And so I appreciate your time. Michelle and Judy, thank you as always for joining me for this conversation. It's wonderful to see you and to have this conversation today with everyone. Yeah. Any other last thoughts?
No, just thank you. And yeah, agreed. Thank you everybody for your presence and time, and sending a lot of love out to all of you, truly.
And wishing for you to be able to slow down.
Yes.
That is my wish for you.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, I will sign off, and don't forget to save the chat, and this is recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel, and I'll send a link out to everyone that was registered for today. So you'll get that in the future. So hopefully not too far away.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Lindsay.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.